There are moments in life that don't shout. They don't arrive with fanfare or lightning. They slip in quietly, like a crack in the foundation you didn't notice until the floor began to shift. Moments that seem small, until something in you refuses to ignore them, and suddenly everything changes. This is where the Katha Upanishad begins, not in a war or a vision of gods, not with miracles or revelations. It begins with a child, a ritual, and a lie. His name is Nachiketa, and though he is young, the soul inside him is not. He lives in a world shaped by ritual, by offerings and chants and sacred fires meant to bridge the space between humans and the divine. A world where meaning is wrapped in ceremony, and ceremony becomes the measure of devotion. But even in a world like this, it's possible to forget why the fire was lit in the first place. His father, Vajravasa, is a respected man. He is performing a Vedic sacrifice, one of the most solemn acts in their tradition. It requires giving away all of one's possessions, everything that binds a man to the material world. The point isn't just to give, it's to let go. But there's a problem. Vajravasa is giving away old cows. Animals, past their usefulness, weak, sick, near death, offerings in form but not in spirit. It's a sacrifice only in name, and Nachiketa sees it. He watches his father, the sacred fire, the gifts, and something in him recoils, not out of rebellion, not from anger, but because it's hollow, and his soul cannot pretend. He asks, "To whom will you give me, Father?" Not with sarcasm, not to embarrass, but as if to hold up a mirror. If you truly wish to give everything, then what about me? In the Vedic world, a son is more than family. He is part of the self, the future, the continuity of one's being. To give away your son would be a true act of surrender. So this question is no small thing. It's a challenge, not to power but to authenticity. And his father, caught in the discomfort of being seen, reacts with sharpness. "To death I give you." Words spoken carelessly, meant to silence, to sting. But the Upanishads don't treat words as passing things. They are sacred, binding, transformative. And Nachiketa hears more than frustration. He hears a door open. So he goes, not with resentment, not with fear, but with a calm that is startling in its purity. He walks toward the house of death. A boy walking alone into the unknown, not because he was cast out, but because he is seeking something more real than what the world around him can offer. There's a kind of honesty that can't be taught. It rises naturally in those who haven't yet learned to numb it. And when that kind of honesty is paired with courage, what emerges is a seeker, not of belief, but of truth. Nachiketa becomes that seeker. We don't know what path he takes. We're not told how far he walks or what dangers he passes, because this isn't geography, it's a spiritual map. He's leaving behind the world of empty rituals and stepping into the mystery, not just toward death, but toward the deeper nature of existence itself. And when he arrives, death is not there, so he waits. 1 night, then 2, then 3. No food, no comfort, no attention, just the boy, the silence, and the threshold. It's a waiting that echoes across all traditions. The 3 days Jonah spent in the belly of the whale, the 3 days Christ lay in the tomb, the 3 nights of darkness before the dawn. This isn't delay, it's initiation. Because before truth reveals itself, it often asks, can you be still long enough to receive it? Most of us fill the silence before it can teach us. We distract ourselves, convince ourselves that answers should come quickly. But Nachiketa waits, not as a demand, but as devotion. And then, on the 3rd day, Yama returns. The god of death finds a boy sitting at his doorstep, unafraid. And he's moved. He apologizes for making the boy wait. Even death, it seems, respects sincerity. And to honor the boy's presence, his courage, his patience, Yama offers 3 wishes, anything he desires. But this isn't a reward. This is recognition. recognition that something rare has arrived at the door of death. Not a body, but a consciousness awake enough to ask real questions. This is not a conversation between a man and a god, it's a meeting between two kinds of truth, one that ends all things, and one that refuses to settle until it understands what lies beyond endings. Even here, before a single question is asked, the Upanishad has already begun its quiet revolution. Because this boy, in walking away from hollow ritual, in choosing to face death instead of pretense, has shown us something profound. That the path to real knowledge doesn't begin with knowing, it begins with the courage to see clearly. The father gave old cows and called it sacrifice. But the son gave comfort, certainty, belonging, and asked for nothing in return. And that is the deeper offering. Not blood, not fire, but honesty. And in that honesty, a new kind of ritual begins, one not performed by priests, but by those willing to burn away illusion. What does it take to walk away from the world you've always known? Not because it's broken, but because it no longer speaks to your soul. What does it take to sit with silence, with questions no one else will ask, and not run? It takes something most of us forget we have. Not strength, nor knowledge, but presence. A willingness to stand at the edge of the known world and say, I'm ready to understand what this life is really about. Nachiketa is not special because he's young, he's special because he remembers. Because even surrounded by ritual and religion, he listens to the voice that says, this isn't enough. That voice lives within all of us. Buried beneath layers of habit and performance, it speaks when the fire of the sacred has dimmed, when the truth no longer fits inside the form. It doesn't shout, it whispers. And sometimes that whisper is a question so honest it opens a window, a doorway not just to death but to awakening. So now the threshold is set. The boy has stepped out of the world of appearances and into the realm where truth waits in silence, not as something to be won, but as something to be remembered. And perhaps the most sacred fire is not the one his father lit, but the one that has been quietly burning in him all along. In the stillness between worlds, something ancient is stirring. The boy who dared to question has entered the place most avoid, not for escape, but for clarity, not for power, but for understanding. And that is where true initiation begins, not with answers, but with the courage to keep asking, to sit in the mystery, to breathe in the unknown, to wait in front of the questions long enough for the truth to unfold from within. This is not just Nachiketa's story, it is the beginning of every real seeker's path. It is a reminder that the journey toward truth rarely starts with a map. It starts with discomfort, with doubt, with a quiet voice inside that says, there must be more than this. And if we have the courage to follow that voice, we too may find ourselves standing at the doorway between death and wisdom, ready to learn what lies beyond the veil. There's a strange thing that happens when you stand face to face with death. The world behind you sharpens. The people you love come into focus, not as memories, but as threads still tangled, still pulling at your heart. Yama, the god of death, has offered Nachiketa 3 boons, 3 wishes, anything he desires. And Nachiketa, standing at the threshold of the unknown, doesn't ask for escape, doesn't ask for heaven, or power, or even wisdom. He asks for something far more human. Let my father's heart be at peace. Let his anger fall away. Let him recognize me when I return. This is the first wish. Not glory, not transcendence, but reconciliation. And it tells us something vital about the soul's journey. Before we seek liberation, before we search for cosmic truths, something inside us wants to make things right. Even at the edge of death, Nachiketa is thinking of his father, of the wound left behind, of the thread that was cut too quickly. Because the spiritual path isn't about abandoning the world, it's about healing it from within. The first wish is not small, it's sacred. To wish for peace in the heart of another, especially someone who hurt you, is one of the most powerful acts a soul can offer. It's not forgiveness in the moral sense, It's deeper than that. It's the recognition that we are bound to each other, and those bonds do not disappear when we cross thresholds. They echo. Even in the presence of death, they echo. So Nachiketa doesn't walk away angry. He doesn't punish his father with silence. He asks that the door between them remain open, that the heat of that sharp moment be cooled with love. And Yama grants it. Your father will welcome you again, he says. His heart will soften, his eyes will see you as he once did. This is more than comfort. It is restoration. Because before we ascend any spiritual ladder, we must return to the ground we left behind and ask, what did I break on the way here? What was broken in me? And can it be made whole again? The first wish reminds us, you don't have to choose between awakening and love, between seeking the truth and tending to the wounds behind you. They are part of the same path. What good is insight if your heart remains closed? What value is knowledge if you carry bitterness like a shield? To ask for the healing of the one who misunderstood you, that is the beginning of wisdom. And that is where Nachiketa starts. Before he seeks answers about the universe, before he asks about the soul or what happens after death, he asks that a single human bond be mended. Because the journey into the divine isn't about escaping relationships, it's about transforming them. This first wish may seem simple, an emotional gesture, a desire for peace between a father and a son, but beneath its surface lies a question that echoes through real life. What must be repaired before we are ready to truly move forward? You see it all the time. The person who dives into spirituality to escape their family pain, never speaking to their brother again. The friend who pursues truth and silence, but still carries an unspoken resentment in their chest. The seeker who wants to meditate away the past, without ever facing the conversation they've avoided for years. We all carry stories that didn't end cleanly. Maybe it was the parent who pushed too hard. Maybe it was a friend who walked away at your lowest point. Maybe it was you, someone you hurt, a silence you never broke, a truth you never told. And somewhere inside, a part of you knows that until that story is honored, if not healed, it remains unfinished. Nachiketa gets this, and that's why this first wish is so much more than emotional closure. It's a recognition that even spiritual courage must begin with human honesty. He could have asked for wisdom first, or immortality, or to skip ahead to enlightenment, but he didn't. He asked for his father's heart to soften. He asked for love to be possible again. Because sometimes what keeps us from awakening isn't ignorance, it's the weight we carry from not being seen, the guilt we didn't resolve, the pain we hardened around, the part of us still waiting to be welcomed home. In therapy, in relationships, even in moments of silence, we learn this again and again. What you don't face becomes what you drag, and what you drag becomes what defines you. So Nachiketa's first wish becomes a kind of spiritual mirror. It asks us, what would you heal if you believed you could? What conversation would you open? What bitterness would you lay down, not to forget, but to be free? Not every wound needs a reunion, but every wound asks to be acknowledged. And that's what this first wish is, a conscious pause at the beginning of the path, a moment to check what you're bringing with you, a moment to ask, do I want to keep carrying this into what's next? It's not dramatic, it's not mystical, but it is sacred. Because the journey to truth doesn't begin in the stars. It begins where the soul turns around, looks into the eyes of the one who hurt it and says, with softness, I want peace more than I want to be right. That's not weakness. That's the fire that clears the way. The first wish reminds us that wisdom cannot bloom where bitterness is rooted, that truth cannot flourish where love is withheld, and that perhaps the greatest transformation begins not in the heavens but in the heart we carry back home. This then is the true beginning, not the door to the cosmos, but the one we knock on when we return to those we once left behind to say with the deepest sincerity, I am still yours, and I hope you are still mine. And in that moment, something ancient and eternal stirs. the soul, having remembered where it came from, begins to remember where it is going. After reconciliation comes the question of foundation, not just peace with the past, but a ground to build the future on. Nachiketa has asked for his father's heart to soften. He has chosen love over pride, return over retreat, and now he turns to his second wish. He asks Yama, "Teach me the sacred fire," the fire sacrifice that leads the soul to the highest realm, the fire that when kindled with understanding does not burn but illuminates. It's a striking request, because on the surface it seems practical, ritualistic, as if Nachiketa has suddenly pivoted to tradition. But beneath it lies a deeper yearning. He is not asking for a ceremony, he is asking for a path. He wants to know what sustains the soul after it has made peace with the world. What practice, what wisdom, what discipline can guide it toward the divine? And Yama, the god of death, honors the question. He reveals the fire. He teaches him the rite, the number of bricks, the measurements. He names the fire after Nachiketa himself. The boy who dared to question now becomes the symbol of the sacred path. But why fire? Why in this moment does Nachiketa ask not for liberation but for a fire sacrifice? Because fire, in the Upanishadik world, is not destruction, it is transformation. Fire consumes, yes, but in consuming it also clarifies. It reduces everything to essence. To understand the fire sacrifice is to understand how the soul moves from form to spirit, from offering to surrender. And that is what Nachiketa seeks. He is not satisfied with peace alone, he wants the blueprint for transcendence. He wants to know how one lives a life that prepares the soul for flight, and Yama, in naming the fire after him, recognizes that this is no ordinary boy. Most come to death seeking release, but Nachiketa comes seeking the path. The fire represents inner discipline, a life of clarity, of moral strength, of devotion not to dogma but to inner alignment. The flames are not outside us, they are inside. Every act of truth is a spark, every sacrifice of ego is a log on the fire. Every time we choose compassion over impulse, truth over convenience, presence over distraction, we stoke the flame. And when the fire burns steadily, when it is fed by sincerity and not by pride, it becomes the force that carries the soul upward. The second wish, then, is the soul's search for structure, a foundation beneath the yearning, because love, though infinite, still needs direction, and the path of fire, of sacred effort, of conscious living, is that direction. It is easy to speak of transcendence, it's harder to live in a way that honors it. Fire reminds us that light is not passive, it must be fed. And so the Upanishad gives us this image. A young seeker, newly reconciled with this world, now learning how to build his life into an altar. Brick by brick, choice by choice, the fire becomes his teacher, and he, the student of inner heat. What are we offering? What are we burning? And what in us will rise with the smoke to touch the sky? This is the question the second wish leaves us with. Not what we seek to escape, but what we are willing to build, and whether the fire within us will be bright enough to carry us all the way home. The second wish is not a detour, it is preparation. It is the soul putting down the tools it will need for the long ascent into truth. Because after peace comes purpose, and before transcendence comes fire. And Nachiketa, once just a questioner, is now becoming a builder of the path itself. But let us look even deeper. In Vedic thought, fire is more than a metaphor. It is the messenger, the bridge between worlds. The smoke that rises from the offering is said to carry the soul's intention upward, from earth to sky, from human to divine. To understand the fire is to understand how the finite touches the infinite. It is to recognize that there is a way to live that does not merely survive but sanctifies. This is why the number of bricks matters, why the measurements are sacred, because even structure can be holy when it is built with intention. Nachiketa is not memorizing a ritual, he is receiving a technology of spirit, a way of life encoded in the language of fire. Discipline, intention, purification, not as punishment, but as preparation for the soul's expansion. And perhaps that is what makes this wish so powerful. It is not a gift Nachiketa receives. It is a responsibility he chooses. He chooses to learn. He chooses to practice. He chooses to participate in his own ascent. This is not a child asking for rescue. It is a soul asking to be shown the work. And what does Yama do? He gives him the right. He honors the request. He recognizes the seeker's sincerity and mirrors it with sacred instruction. And then he names the fire after the boy. The ritual becomes more than instruction. It becomes legacy. And the fire is no longer just fire. It becomes Nachiketa himself. His sincerity, his discipline, his readiness to become light. We are left then, not with a lesson but with a living image. A fire built from intention, fed by devotion, and named after the one who dared to ask. What fire burns in you? What are you willing to tend? What are you ready to let go of in order to rise? The sacred fire is not a moment. It is a lifetime. This chapter in Nachiketa's journey reminds us that real transformation isn't handed to us. It is forged brick by brick in the quiet, intentional acts of living. To live a spiritual life is not to avoid the world but to sanctify it. To see each moment as a step on the altar, each breath as a fuel for the flame. Nachiketa's fire is not only a Vedic ritual, it is an archetype, a symbol of the inner altar we must each build. And once that fire is lit, once it is named, it becomes the soul's North Star. So as the sacred dialogue continues and the questions grow deeper, Nachiketa now carries with him more than resolve. He carries a flame. And it is with that flame that he will illuminate the darkness to come. Because even before the soul can ask about the final mystery, death itself, it must first be willing to become light. And Nachiketa has become that light in its earliest form, not a blaze, but a steady spark, lit in silence, fed by sincerity, and destined to rise. And what is most striking is that this fire is not built alone. It is passed from teacher to seeker, from God to mortal, from generation to generation. It is shared, sustained, and remembered. To kindle the sacred fire is to join an ancient lineage of those who dared to ask, and dared even more to embody what they were shown. Nachiketa stands among them now, and through him, we too are invited to step closer to the flame. So pause and ask yourself, what would your altar look like? Not one built of stone, but of choices. Of kindness offered when no one watched. Of truth spoken when it trembled on your lips. Of moments when you turned from fear and walked toward courage instead. Because maybe the fire we seek isn't waiting in a temple. Maybe it's waiting in the life we are building day by day, choice by choice, breath by breath. And the question becomes not just what fire are we tending, but who are we becoming in its light? There are questions we carry like wounds, quiet ones we don't say aloud, because they don't fit easily in conversation, because they can't be solved by reason, because we fear what might happen if we truly ask them. But they live in us anyway. They rise when we lose someone we love, when a diagnosis cracks our illusion of control. When we realize that, no matter what we build, we will one day have to let it go. And beneath all those moments, a single ache pulses. What happens when we die? This isn't curiosity, it's longing to know what endures, to know what's real, to know what we are beyond the vanishing. And this is where Nachiketa stands now, not at the edge of belief, but at the threshold of being. He has asked for his father's peace. He has asked to learn the sacred fire, but now he asks the question that burns through all others. When the body falls, what remains? He doesn't ask from fear. He asks from clarity. And Yama hears it. Not just the words, but the silence behind them. He sees the boy's gaze, steady, unflinching. He sees that this is no longer about reward. This is about truth. And so Yama doesn't answer, not yet. Instead, he tests him. He offers him something else, everything else, Take wealth, he says. Take a long life, sons, daughters, kingdoms, music, pleasure, power, all of it. Just don't ask this. It is the kind of offer that ends most spiritual journeys, not with failure, but with almost. Almost awakened, almost free, almost ready. Because the truth doesn't hide behind cruelty, it hides behind comfort. But Nachiketa doesn't blink. He doesn't falter, flutter, or stall, or hesitate. He says calmly, even the longest life ends, even the sweetest joy fades. All that you offer will pass, and I will pass too. So no, keep your treasures. I want only what is real. And Yama exhales, because this is rare. This is not rebellion, this is not ambition, this is sincerity, stripped of ego, stripped of grasping. This is readiness. But still Yama does not speak the answer, not yet, because truth is not information. It is transformation, and the soul must be steady before it receives it. He sees that the boy has refused every distraction. He sees that Nachiketa is no longer looking for something to believe. He is ready to remember what is already known. So Yama begins, not with teachings but with unteachings, not with statements but with silence. He says, this question cannot be answered casually. It is not light. It is not small. It cannot be carried by the mind alone. To receive it, something in you must dissolve. And that's where the chapter begins to close. Not with knowledge, but with the absence of pretense. Not with clarity, but with reverence. Nachiketa has crossed the threshold, but he has not yet been shown what lies beyond it. He has only emptied himself of desire, of fear, of distraction. And now he waits. Not impatiently, not anxiously, but with a stillness that feels like worship. This is the moment before the truth arrives. The ground has been cleared, the vessel has been shaped, and what comes next will not be an answer. It will be a remembering. Silence stretches between them. The question has been asked, and Yama, the guardian of endings, does not rush to fill the space. He has seen seekers come and go, some trembling with fear, some intoxicated by desire. But this boy, this quiet, steady flame, has asked the one question that cannot be unasked. And so finally, Yama speaks. He begins not with what death is, but what the self is not. The soul, he says, is not born. It does not die. It is not slain when the body is slain. It is ancient, eternal, unchanging. Smaller than the smallest, greater than the greatest. It moves, and yet it moves not. It is far, and also near. Yama is not offering comfort. He is undoing the fabric of ordinary perception. He is pulling back the veil that makes us believe we are only this body, only this personality, only this fragile arc between birth and death. He speaks in paradox because truth does not fit inside a single sentence. It lives in the tension between opposites. Nachiketa listens, not passively but with his entire being. He is not gathering facts, he is entering a new atmosphere. And this is the terrain Yama begins to map. There is a self within us that does not age or grieve. It has never been wounded, so it does not need to be healed. It has no beginning, and so it fears no end. It is the still presence behind every thought, the quiet observer of every joy and sorrow. But this self is not something we gain like a possession. It isn't a goal to reach, or a prize to earn. It is already here, hidden not because it is far away, but because it is so close, so constant we have stopped noticing it. So Yama shifts his teaching to metaphor. He gives Nachiketa an image. Imagine a chariot. The body is the vehicle, the senses the spirited horses. The mind holds the reins. The intellect must steer. But the self is the one being carried, the traveller, the silent presence at the heart of the ride. If the intellect is alert, the mind steady, and the senses well trained, the journey moves with purpose. But when the intellect sleeps and the mind becomes tangled in craving, the horses pull in every direction. And what happens then? The self, though untouched, becomes enmeshed. It forgets its stillness. It identifies with motion. Yama doesn't speak of punishment or sin. He speaks of misalignment, of what happens when awareness is no longer at the center. This, he says, is the source of suffering, not malice, not failure, but forgetfulness. When we forget who we are, we mistake every fleeting thought for truth. We confuse sensation for reality. We seek permanence in things that cannot last. And so, Yama teaches, the first movement toward awakening isn't outward. It isn't a quest to find something new. It is a quiet turning, a remembering. You are the rider because you were never anything else, Yama says. And so, Yama teaches, the self isn't a riddle to be solved, not a mountaintop to climb. It is the ground beneath your feet, the breath behind your breath, the awareness that precedes every moment of thought. Even now it watches, not from a distance but from within. It has watched through the tears of childhood, through the anxieties of youth, through the long stretches of forgetfulness, and yet, to live from that place requires more than understanding. It demands intimacy. It asks that we slow down enough to see what has always been present. It asks for attention, not to gain anything but to stop abandoning what is already here. So Yama does not rush. He lets silence return. He gives Nachiketa room to digest. Because this is not a statement, it is a revelation. And revelation cannot be forced, it must unfold. There are no fireworks, no thunder in the sky, only the quiet dissembling of illusion. And in that space something in Nachiketa begins to settle, not into an answer but into a deeper way of seeing. He sees now that death is not the enemy, it is a threshold, a shedding of what is temporary, and the self, it does not cross that threshold. It does not move or shift or break, it is what remains when everything else does. Yama does not call for belief. He points toward a truth that is already beating in the chest. And when he says, the self is not something you will become, but something you must remember, Nachiketa understands. And perhaps we do too, because what was planted in Nachiketa has always lived in us as well. That stillness, that watcher, that presence. Not a destination, but the beginning we have ignored. It doesn't need to be named again and again, it only needs to be seen, felt and trusted. But Yama does not stop there. He now draws a finer line between the outer self and the inner self. He speaks of the two selves that live within, the ego, shaped by time, and the self, untouched by it. One rises and falls with the world. It depends on praise, fears, judgment, clings to control. The other is steady, witnessing the rise and fall but not swept by it. To mistake the ego for the self is to live in exile from one's own being. To serve the ego is to be bound, even in pleasure, but to serve the self is to taste a freedom no circumstance can undo. Yama explains that these two selves are not enemies, but they cannot share the throne. One must lead, and for the soul to be free, it must follow the one that does not change. He introduces a new image. Two birds sit on the same tree. One eats the fruit, sweet, bitter, both. The other only watches. We spend our lives as the first bird, consuming every experience, hoping to find fulfillment through more. But when we grow tired, when even joy becomes empty, we begin to sense the presence of the second bird. That still witness, never eating yet fully alive. To know the self is to return to that bird, to sit beside it, to rest in what watches without grasping. This is not abandonment of life, but a deeper presence within it. And now Nachiketa sees, what he came to ask was not only about death, but about identity. Not just what survives death, but what has always survived every moment of life. And Yama, seeking that the boy understands, begins to guide him further inward, toward the light that shines behind the senses, behind the intellect, behind even the desire to know. Because that light is what he truly is, and from here, the teachings will begin to unfold with greater clarity. Not to explain the self, but to illuminate the path back to it. For the self is not reached through acquisition, but through subtraction, through peeling back every layer we mistook for identity, It reveals itself not when we arrive somewhere new, but when we finally stop running from where we already are. The journey inward is not a journey of distance, it is a shift of depth, and with every breath, Nachiketa steps closer to what cannot be named, but can be known, closer to the fire that does not burn, closer to the source that does not fade, closer to himself, as he was before the world taught him to forget. The light has been introduced, the eternal self glimpsed, but Nachiketa, still anchored in a world of choices, must now learn to walk the path that leads to that light. And so Yama reveals the crossroads within every moment. He calls them Shreyas and Prayas, two paths, two instincts, two ways of being. Prayas is the path of the pleasant, what feels good now, what flatters the senses, what soothes the surface. It is the pull of ease, comfort, distraction. It feeds the temporary self, the part that fears discomfort, craves validation, avoids depth. Shreyas is the path of the good, not always easy, often uncomfortable, but it leads to lasting truth. It nourishes the deeper self, the part that seeks alignment, growth, awakening. And these two paths are always available, not just once in a lifetime, but constantly, in every decision, every interaction, every breath. Yama does not condemn Prayas, he simply shows its limitation. Prayas satisfies, but only for a moment, then it fades, and we are left chasing again. Prayas is the familiar pattern, choosing what's quick, what demands the least of us. It's the temptation to avoid silence, to turn away from the discomfort of inner work. It is the urge to fill space with noise, with activity, with consumption. It is the desire to escape. It's reaching for your phone instead of sitting with your thoughts. It's clinging to relationships that distract you from loneliness, instead of facing the root of it. It's delaying what matters for what's easy, and each time the soul is left a little more forgotten. Shreyas, by contrast, asks something of us. It often begins with resistance, even pain. But it leads inward, it builds clarity, it deepens our relationship with the self. Shreyas is the quiet yes to the long path. The decision to be honest when it would be easier not to be. To sit in stillness when the world tells you to scroll. To listen instead of react, to forgive instead of hold on. It is the path of integration, not avoidance. Shreyas asks for inner maturity, for the willingness to stay when it gets uncomfortable, to resist the need for immediate gratification, to look beneath the surface and ask, what is real here? What is needed? Not just what is wanted. It often asks us to choose simplicity when we could choose excess, depth when we could choose distraction, silence when we could choose noise. And it's not because the other choices are inherently wrong, but because they draw us outward when the journey is inward. Yama tells Nachiketa, both approach the soul, the wise distinguish between them, the fool chooses Prayas and misses the real goal. The teaching here is subtle but profound. We are not punished for choosing Prayas, we are simply delayed. We remain caught in cycles that bring short-term pleasure but long-term confusion, and yet this isn't a moral lesson. It's not about guilt, it's about awareness. Because once we truly see the two paths, we begin to notice them everywhere, in how we respond to anger, in how we choose to listen, in how we speak, love, rest, work. Do we act from impulse or intention, from fear or truth, from habit or presence? Yama is teaching discernment, the ability to pause, to sense the difference between what pulls us away from our center and what brings us back to it. He tells Nachiketa that the rare soul is the one who chooses Shreyas consistently, not perfectly, but courageously. Because Shreyas is not dramatic, it doesn't reward with applause, it asks for quiet strength, for inner loyalty. And yet, it is the path that transforms. It is the path that prepares the soul for deeper realization. Prayas and Shreyas are not just philosophical ideas. They are lenses through which every part of life can be seen. Even our spiritual practice can fall under either. Is it done to appear holy, to gain favor, to perform? Or Is it a sincere, humble offering of presence? The path of Shreyas often leads through discomfort because it strips away illusion. It demands self-inquiry. It brings us face to face with our own patterns, our own shadows. It calls us to accountability, to growth that doesn't happen overnight. It is a path of patience, of returning again and again, not because it is easy, but because something within knows it is real. Sometimes Shreyas means waiting. Sometimes it means walking away. Sometimes it means holding space for a truth that hasn't yet revealed itself. It is not passive, but it is quiet, not flashy, but fiercely honest. Shreyas takes courage, not the kind shouted from mountaintops, but the soft, persistent kind that shows up in quiet decisions, to keep trying, to take responsibility, to say no to what no longer serves your becoming. It can feel like sacrifice at first, but what is truly happening is refinement, not a giving up, but a giving in to something deeper, more stable, more enduring. Nachiketa listens. He sees that this moment isn't about grand revelations. It is about the day-to-day architecture of the soul's direction. And in his willingness to choose what is good over what is easy, he becomes a rare student. Not just one who learns, but one who integrates. Yama smiles because the journey toward the self is not about escaping life. It is about learning how to live with presence. And every choice is a step, every moment a path. 2 doors, one leads to forgetting, the other to remembering. And remembering is the beginning of freedom. The Upanishadic wisdom here is not prescriptive. It does not tell us what to do. Instead, it sharpens our inner vision. It teaches us to see, because when we can see clearly, the path becomes self-evident. We begin to sense, almost intuitively, which choice honors our essence and which choice fragments it. And so the teachings of Prayas and Shreyas ripple outward. They touch how we approach love. Do we love to possess or do we love to liberate? They touch how we chase success. Do we seek recognition or do we seek to serve? They touch how we hold sorrow. Do we numb it or do we let it open us? They also teach us how to respond to the unknown. When life is uncertain, do we panic and cling, or do we turn inward and trust? Shreyas asks us to befriend uncertainty, to let go of control, to move through fear instead of avoiding it. These teachings even echo through the mundane. How we wake up in the morning, how we tend to our bodies, how we treat strangers, whether we stay present while washing the dishes or rush to the next moment. Prayas and Shreyas do not just appear at turning points, they live in every step, every thought. And when we begin to recognize them, our lives take on a different texture. We begin to live not from reaction, but from remembrance. Shreyas is not always beautiful at first glance, but it is true, and truth in time becomes the most beautiful thing of all. Yama knows this. He sees the potential in Nachiketa's question. He sees a soul not asking for comfort but for direction, a soul that is willing to be reshaped. And so before deeper truths can be given, this choice must be understood, not just once but over and over. For every step forward, the question returns. Which path now? Which voice will you follow? In silence, Nachiketa absorbs the teaching. He knows that wisdom is not in what we know, but in how we choose. And he is beginning to choose from a different place, a deeper place, the place where truth does not shout, but whispers, and still somehow is heard, the place where the journey truly begins. The silence between them is different now, not the silence of waiting, not the hush before a question. This is the silence after the asking, after the illusions have been refused, after the distractions have been denied. A silence that demands not politeness but precision. And so Yama, keeper of the threshold, begins to speak again, not in riddles, not in tests, but in clear terms. The path splits, the soul diverges. Some are born again into the womb, others passed beyond, into stillness. That's it. No grand language, no cosmic backdrop, just two outcomes, return or release. And in those two fates lies the entire difference between bondage and freedom. Let's slow this down, because this is not a statement of belief, it is a metaphysical law, a truth that doesn't need belief to operate. The soul that does not know its own nature, that remains entangled in desire, confusion, or identification, returns back into form, back into sensation, back into the loop of becoming, not as punishment but as continuation. Desire has gravity, ignorance has momentum. Whatever remains unresolved is pulled forward. The soul does not go to a judgment, it follows the direction of its own weight. Rebirth is not a sentence, it is a trajectory. You move where your vision points, and if your vision is still outward, toward experience, toward accumulation, toward identity, then you return to it, again and again. Not because you are evil, not because you are broken, but because you are still unfinished. And what of those who do not return? They are not saved. They are not rewarded. They are still. Stillness here does not mean absence, it does not mean nothingness, it means that the soul has ceased orbiting, it has exited the cycle of action and reaction, the loop of wanting, reaching, grasping, returning. It no longer seeks to be completed, because it has recognized that it already is. The Upanishad does not say this soul ascends to a heaven or travels to a paradise, it simply says it does not come back. Because where there is no more seeking, there is no more return. So what governs this split? Desire, behavior, worth? No. As is one's desire, so is one's will. As is the will, so is the deed. As is the deed, so becomes the destiny. This is the engine, the formula, the law behind the law. It's not about divine preference, it's not about morality in the social sense, it's about alignment. Desire points the direction, will gives it traction, action sets it into motion. And destiny, the soul's next movement, is just the final expression of that chain. If you want, you move. If you move, you act. If you act, you arrive. And the place you arrive is not chosen for you, it is simply the endpoint of the path your own desires have charted. This is karma, not as judgment, but as architecture. But Yama is not finished. He does not speak only of motion, he speaks of what lies beneath it. There is something deeper than the current, something older than desire, something untouched by action, untouched by return. That is the self, and the self does not return because the self never left. It is always still, always full, always here. It does not move because it is the space within which all movement happens. To realize the self is to snap the cycle, not break it, but step outside it. Not because the cycle ends, but because you no longer need it. So why do we come back? Because we believe we are not enough. We believe we must become something more, accumulate more, experience more, prove more, fix more, perfect more. We forget what we are, and in that forgetting we bind ourselves to becoming. And becoming demands rebirth. It requires a body, a stage, a script. Until one day or one lifetime, we stop. We turn inward. We ask the question Nachiketa asked. What remains when all else falls away? That question is not harmless. It unthreads the fabric of illusion. And once the illusion is seen through, the soul no longer needs to return. It has remembered. And memory in that sense is liberation. But let's look closer at what return actually means. Rebirth is not just another life, it is the return to ignorance. The re-immersion in a world of surfaces, a world of partial knowing, of temporary identities, of inherited patterns. You are born again into a story, into habits not fully yours, into desires half remembered, into wounds still aching from some other time. You forget what you once glimpsed, and the forgetting becomes your life. This is not cruel, it is simply the nature of things. As the moon follows the sun, the soul follows its impression. But if in this life or any life you remember, then the game begins to dissolve. You no longer invest in the character. You start to look for the author, and that is the beginning of non-return. Yama uses no images here, no parables, because this teaching does not benefit from metaphor. It must be spoken clearly. The soul that knows does not return. Why? Because there is nothing to return to. Once you realize the self is unchanging, eternal, luminous, not as a concept but as an experience, you realize that everything else is contextual, temporary, necessary for the game, but not for the truth. You return only when you still believe in the game. You stay only when the illusion is still sticky. But when the false has been seen through, not just intellectually but existentially, then the self becomes obvious. And obviousness is the final step. Not some esoteric trance, just a clear, irreversible seeing. The ancient sages called this Jivamukti, liberation while still alive. Not after death, not later. Now. A person who has remembered what they are cannot be bound. Even if the body dies, even if it lives again, there is no more I to carry karma, no more ego to be invested in the cycle. The individual identity becomes transparent. It continues to act, speak, love, and move. But behind it, the stillness has taken root. And from stillness, there is no compulsion, there is no return, because there was never departure. Yama pauses. He does not try to make it easy. He knows the mind will resist. It wants answers with edges. It wants conclusions that tie up. But the soul is not a riddle to solve, it is a light to recognize. So instead of adding more, he simply reinforces the stakes. Ignorance binds, knowledge frees, the ignorant soul moves again, the knower rests. And so we are left with a kind of final simplicity. The journey is not upward nor outward, it is inward, until movement itself dissolves. There is no ascension, there is no reward. There is only the ending of compulsion, the quieting of the engine, the stilling of the storm, and in that stillness, there is peace. Not as a feeling, not as an emotion, but as a recognition. I was never in motion. I was never separate. I was never anything but this. This is where the text begins to shift. The boy who asked about death is no longer standing at the edge of it. He is standing in something larger, something that makes death irrelevant. Not because death is denied, but because the self is not touched by it. And now the path is narrowing. The final teachings are close. But first, this moment must settle. The truth must echo. Stillness is not the end of something, it is the place from which everything begins. There are no more wishes to ask, no more tests to pass, no more distractions to refuse. Something has shifted. You can feel it in the pace of the air, in the silence between words, in the way the story no longer feels like a story, but like a mirror or a flame. Something is no longer being told. Something is being revealed. Yama, the god of death, does not announce this shift. He does not say, "Now comes the great secret." He just begins to speak from a different place. A deeper one, or perhaps a place that was always here, waiting. Because what's coming next is not an answer to Nachiketa's question, it's an end to the question itself. The self is not born. It does not die. It was not created, it will not be destroyed. It is unborn, eternal, ancient and forever the same. This is not metaphor, this is not poetry, this is not a truth that exists somewhere else. This is you. Not the you that worries, not the you that dreams. Not the you that grew up, learned to speak, learned to doubt, not the personality, not the same, not the story, but the one who's been watching it all. Yama doesn't speak of the soul as if it's a thing inside you. He speaks of it as what you are when everything else has fallen away, and not just after death, but right now, if you are willing to look clearly enough. It is smaller than the smallest, greater than the greatest. It moves and it moves not. It is far and it is near. These are not contradictions. They are coordinates to a truth beyond ordinary logic. This is the self the Upanishads speak of, the unchanging witness, the light behind the eyes, the space in which thought arises, the silence that remains when even your name has gone quiet. This is not a philosophy. It is a realization. It doesn't need to be believed, it only needs to be seen. But seen how? Not with the eyes, not with the mind, with the whole of your being. It is not known like a fact, it is known like a memory, like a sunrise you'd forgotten, until it returned. And here Yama turns to Nachiketa and speaks without separation. He does not say this self exists, he says, that which is the essence of all things, that thou art. Tattvamasi, 3 words that undress the soul. Imagine it. The voice of death telling you, you are not what dies. The god of endings saying, you are what remains. You are not a visitor here waiting to leave. You are the space through which all visitors come and go. This is not comfort. This is reality. Not later, now. So what does it mean to be that? To be the flame and not the flicker? To be the ocean and not the wave? To be the sky and not the storm? It means this. You were never the roles. You were never the fears. You were never the masks. You were not the body, though you lived in it. You were not the thoughts, though they raced through you. You were not even the seeker, though you played that part so well. You were the awareness behind it all. You still are. You always will be. But this isn't easy to accept, is it? Because the mind doesn't know how to be still. It wants to do, to analyze, to compare. It says, that can't be me. I don't feel eternal. I feel anxious. I feel flawed. I feel ordinary. Of course you do. You've lived your whole life as the reflection. But now you're being asked to turn and face the mirror, to see what's looking. You are not the image. You are the light behind it. You are the silence beneath the sound. You are the stillness beneath the movement, and that is terrifying, because it means giving up everything you thought you were. But what if you did? What if, even for a moment, you stopped believing the voice in your head? What if you stopped holding on to the identity you built? The one who tries, the one who fails, the one who wants to be free. What if you saw right now that the one who wants to be free is not the one who is free? What if freedom isn't a destination, but your original condition? Nachiketa is no longer seeking. He is listening in a new way, not with thought, with presence. And presence doesn't ask for proof. It recognizes that's what this chapter is. Not a new idea, a remembering, a veil falling, a return. Yama says the self is hidden in the heart, subtler than the subtlest, greater than the greatest. It is the light of lights, beyond all darkness. This isn't just for sages in forests. It's for anyone ready to sit still long enough to see, not see with the eyes, but with the center. That place in you that watches without comment, that waits without tension, that knows without thinking. You don't need to reach it. You need only stop running from it. This isn't transcendence. This is intimacy with reality. This is not floating above life. It's returning to the ground beneath your feet and realizing it was sacred all along. You don't need to escape to be free. You need only see what you are without the mask. So what happens when this knowing lands? You don't vanish. You don't become supernatural. You become real. You speak with less defense. You act with less fear. You walk through the world not needing to win, not needing to be seen, because you are already full. You still feel, you still cry, you still stumble, but you are no longer lost. Even your suffering begins to change, because you stop being afraid of it. You see pain as weather, passing, held, witnessed, and the one who witnesses does not suffer. Now the chariot metaphor returns, but it means something new. You are not the rider anymore. You are the presence that shines through the eyes of the rider. You are the intelligence behind the reins. You are the silence between the hoofbeats. You are what never enters the chariot and yet rides through every life. You do not need direction. You are the road. You are the light on the path. You are the stillness in the motion. And this isn't mystical stuff. This is the core of Vedanta, the truth at the heart of the Upanishads. You are not separate. You never were. You are Brahman, not like a wave is part of the ocean. Like a wave is the ocean, playing for a moment, then returning to itself. Not gone, just recognized. But what about the world? You still live in it. You still go to work, pay bills, hold hands, wash dishes, feel tired. Yes, and now you do it awake. You answer the email, but you are not consumed by it. You experience emotion, but you are not collapsed by it. You live, but you no longer believe the lie that you are your life. You know that you are that in which your life unfolds. You begin to see it everywhere. The self peeking through the eyes of a stranger, the self humming in the silence of dawn, the self shimmering in the ache of loss, the self breathing in your breath. Not near you, not inside you, as you. Nachiketa has nothing more to say. The teaching is complete, and yet it hasn't ended, because the teaching is not these words. It is what you are when these words fall away. And now that flame, that sacred fire lit in the second wish, is no longer a symbol. It is steady, it is real, it is within, it needs no tending, it burns without fuel, because it was never lit. It was only remembered. This is the moment where the seeker disappears. The one who searched is no longer needed, because the one who sought the truth was the truth all along. You do not awaken to something, you awaken from something, from the belief in separation, from the illusion of incompleteness, from the sleep of forgetting, and in waking, you do not become more. You become what you were, before the fear, before the striving, before the name, that thou art. You are that. You always were. No one can give it to you. No one can take it from you. It is the flame behind your breath. It is the mirror behind your face. It is the silence before every word. It is not distant. It is not hidden. It is you. There are journeys that begin with a question, and there are journeys that end with stillness. Not the stillness of sleep or retreat, but the stillness of arrival. The stillness that lives on the other side of fire. And so we return, not as we were, but as what we've always been. Nachiketa has received what few ever do. He asked, and the veil parted. He listened, and the silence spoke. He stood in the presence of death and saw through it. He was not given a reward. He was not promised heaven. He was not crowned with power. He was given something far rarer. He remembered, and now he returns, not away from mystery, but into it, into the world of breathing people, burning lives, unfinished stories. He returns into life. But he does not return as a seeker. He returns as space, as light, as stillness behind motion. The kind of presence that no longer looks for confirmation because it no longer forgets what is true. This is the shape of wisdom. It does not speak louder. It listens more deeply. It does not need to teach. It begins to reflect. It does not chase understanding. It breathes through not knowing. This is the wisdom Nachiketa now carries. Not a doctrine, not a formula, but a flame that no longer needs fuel to burn. And so, he walks home, back to the same house, back to the same father, back to the same world that sent him away with a careless curse. But now, he walks differently. Each step is less a movement through space and more a movement through remembering. There is no triumph in his eyes, only quiet, clarity, compassion. Because the boy who left wanted truth. The one who returns has become it. We rarely speak of the return. We talk of awakening, of revelation, of leaving behind the world, but what about when you come back? What happens when you open your eyes and the world hasn't changed, but you have? What happens when you carry the self in your chest, but are asked to live among those who still think they are separate? What happens when you are no longer searching, but the people around you still are? This is the path of integration. This is the slow, sacred art of embodiment. You take what was remembered in silence and carry it into sound. You take what was seen in stillness and breathe it into motion. You return not to fix the world, but to move through it with presence. The father sees his son approach. He expects a boy who has been broken. He expects someone to apologize. He expects the old story to resume. But something in Nachiketa has shifted the air. He walks like he is not arriving, but revealing what was always here. His eyes do not accuse. His voice does not tremble. He bows, but is not subservience. It is a bow of love, of full circle grace. This is what awakening does. It does not reject the past. It enfolds it. It does not erase the pain. It makes space for it. It does not close the wound. It holds it with light. Because the realized self does not need to forget what happened. It only needs to stop being defined by it. There is no need for words between them. The fire that separated them has burned itself clean. All that remains is presence. And in presence, reconciliation blooms without effort. Because once you know who you are, you no longer need to be right. You no longer need to explain. You simply return, and in that returning, love begins again. Now we must speak of time, because what Nachiketa brings back from the threshold of death is not just a vision of the eternal. It is a changed relationship to time itself. When you live from the self, you no longer feel rushed. You no longer live from the future. You begin to see that all becoming is a kind of forgetting, and that every moment fully lived is a return to the now. Time does not disappear, it softens. You are not dragged by it. You move with it, like breath, like tide, like flame. This shift cannot be faked. It reveals itself in the smallest things. You walk slower, you listen without waiting to speak. You stop trying to impress. You sit without checking your phone. You feel your body as a gift, not a project. You stop needing to know what's next, because the next moment is already here, and it is enough. This is how the flame lives on, not in sermons, but in how you pour your tea, in how you respond to anger, in how you say, "I don't know," without shame, in how you pause before reacting, in how you let someone finish their sentence, in how you greet the ordinary as if it was sacred, because now you know it is. What was once mundane now shines. What was once hollow now hums, not because the world changed, but because the lens did, because the ego stepped aside, and the self began to see through your eyes. And yes, the ego returns, of course it does, but now it's a visitor, not the ruler. You see its fear, you see its stories, you see its games, but you don't believe them anymore. You let them pass like weather. You smile at their drama, and you stay still. Nachiketa is not immune to life. He will grieve, he will ache, he will one day grow old, but he is no longer afraid of any of it, because he knows nothing essential can be lost. Not when you know who you are. Not when you've met the self and realized it was the one watching all along. Now the flame is not just in the boy, it is in his walk, in his speech, in his presence, and slowly it begins to light others, not through effort, but through resonance, not because he teaches, but because he embodies. This is how truth spreads, not by argument, by stillness, not by belief, but by reflection, not by conversion, by reminding. You don't need to convince anyone. You simply become the kind of presence that makes others remember themselves. You'll notice it. One day someone will sit beside you and say, "I don't know what it is, but I feel more like myself around you." That's when you'll know. The return has taken root. The self is now living through you, and the flame is lighting the path for others. We cannot all become sages in forests, but we can become silent enough to carry the forest within. We can walk our cities and offices with the same stillness as the cave. We can fold laundry with sacred hands. We can speak to children as if they are gods in disguise. We can answer emails with care, hold grief without resistance, share joy without attachment. This is the real return. Not to escape the world, but to sanctify it. And you will forget. Of course you will. But now you will forget differently. You'll forget with awareness. You'll return more gently. The gap between forgetting and remembering will shrink, and eventually they will feel like part of the same wave. Breathing in, forgetting. Breathing out, remembering. No judgment, just rhythm, just grace. This is spiritual maturity. Not always being clear, but always being willing to return. Not perfection, but presence. Not control, but intimacy. The chariot returns too. The old metaphor now deeper. Your body moves, your senses pull, your mind stirs, your intellect steers. But now you know you are not the chariot. You are the light within it. And that light, though unseen, is what makes the journey sacred. So this is the final wish. Not knowledge, but embodiment. Not more answers, but the courage to live the one truth fully. You are that, Tattvam Asi, not as philosophy, not as escape, as the way you walk, the way you love, the way you return again and again, to the self. You won't always feel it, but you'll always be it. Even in sorrow, even in doubt, even in the thick of the forgetting, you are still that. And you are still whole. The story doesn't end here. It begins here. Again, because every moment is a chance to walk with presence, to listen from silence, to speak from truth. Every breath is a flame being tended. Every pause is a return to the altar. And this altar is not in the forest, it's in your heart, in your breath, in this very moment. So return to your life, to your body, to your breath. But carry the flame now, carry it softly, carry it fully. Let it light the room, let it warm others, let it guide your becoming. And when you forget, let it remind you. You were never apart. You were only learning how to come home. The journey began with a question, one that rose not from fear, but from a deeper honesty. What happens when we die? A question simple on the surface, but beneath it, something trembling, something ancient. A yearning not just for knowledge, but for truth. Not an answer to quiet the mind, but a revelation that would open the soul. Nachiketa asked it, and everything changed. He walked away from comfort, from tradition, from appearances. He walked alone into the house of death. Not for glory, not for power, but because he refused to live in a world where the sacred had become hollow. And in that refusal, he began the oldest journey. Through silence, he waited. Through testing, he remained still. Through temptation, he did not waver. And eventually, the doors opened. He was shown what lies beyond endings. Not a heaven, not a doctrine, but a truth too simple for language. A truth so intimate it had been overlooked all along. That what dies is not what we are. That beneath the changing, beneath the story, beneath the name, there is something unmoving, unborn, undying. Something not touched by time or loss or even death itself. This is what the Upanishads reveal. And now the boy who asked has returned. But he is no longer a boy. He is no longer seeking. He walks the same roads, he sees the same faces, but the world no longer defines him. Because he has remembered the one thing that cannot be forgotten, the self. Not the self we build through memory and effort, not the personality we protect and perform, but the self that is presence itself, silent, watching, awake. And so the Katha Upanishad closes, not with a triumph, not with a conclusion, but with a return not to what he was, but to the place within him that had always been whole. And here, something happens. The story falls away. The metaphors dissolve. The questions that once carried so much urgency go quiet. And into that quiet, a new kind of attention begins to emerge. It does not ask what happens after death. It asks what is here, beneath all appearances, right now. It asks, if I am not the one who dies, then who am I? If I am not the body, not the voice in my head, not even the one who seeks, then what remains? This is where the next Upanishad begins. The Brihadaranyaka Upanishad, the great forest teaching. It does not arrive with myth or miracle. It doesn't begin with fire, or tests, or gods. It begins with space, vast, open, silent. And in that space a new kind of teacher speaks, not with parables, not with promises, but with clarity sharp enough to strip illusions from the root. His name, Yajnavalkya, a sage, not interested in impressing, but in dissolving. He does not offer comfort. He offers a mirror, and into that mirror we are invited to look, not to understand something new, but to recognize what has always been true. He is asked, what is the self? He replies only with this, neti, neti, not this, not this. It's not poetic evasion, it's precision. Whatever you can describe, whatever you can point to, whatever you can name, that's not it. The body, you are aware of it. You watch it age, but it is not you. The mind, you observe its movement, its storms, its silence, but you are not the mind. Emotions come and go, memories rise and pass. Thoughts appear and fade. You witness all of them, so you cannot be any of them. You are the one who sees, the silent presence behind all phenomena, the unchanging awareness in which everything else changes. And here, the Brihadaranyaka offers its gift. Not a new answer, but a deeper question. Not what happens when we die, but who is it that lives? Who is it that breathes your breath, but does not begin or end with it? Who hears these words, but cannot be contained by them? Who stands behind every moment of experience, watching quietly, never disturbed, never divided? This is the self, not as a soul floating inside you, not as a spark hiding in the body, but as the ground of your very being. The light in which all thoughts, sensations, identities, and experiences arise. It has no form, it has no edge, it cannot be seen, because it is what makes seeing possible. And yet, it is not separate from you, it is you. Not the version of you that the world sees, not the one who succeeds, fails, grows, or declines. The one who remains, the one who was never born, the one who does not die. The sages do not ask you to believe this, they do not require faith, they ask for something more difficult. They ask you to stop pretending, to stop mistaking what changes for what is constant, to stop clinging to names, identities, and roles as if they define you, to stop running from the stillness that has always been watching. This teaching is not mystical, it is not abstract, it is the most direct instruction ever given. See what you are not, and in that seeing, discover what you are, not through effort, not through striving, through the simple, radical act of being still. It is here, the Brihadaranyaka, in that the journey shifts forever. There is no longer a path to walk, no gate to reach, no fire to kindle. There is only the undoing of confusion, the falling away of what never truly belonged to you. And once enough has fallen, the self reveals itself. not as something new, but as something so obvious it could never be noticed before, like the eye that sees but cannot see itself, like the sky that holds every cloud but is never touched by them. The sages say, "You are that. Tattvam asi." Not metaphorically, not symbolically, literally. You are the unchanging, you are the light behind the eyes, you are the stillness behind the mind. You are the one who has been watching since the beginning of your life, but has never been defined by it. Even now, as you hear these words, something in you recognizes them. Not with logic, but with remembrance. Because this truth has no sound. It echoes from a place beneath language, and when it lands, you don't gain anything. You simply stop pretending you are something else. You stop believing the fear. You stop chasing the image. You stop performing for the mirror. And in that stopping, you begin to live. Not as an idea, but as a perfected version of yourself. But as the awareness that does not need to be perfected. The fire of the Katha Upanishad has already done its work. It burned away distraction. It revealed the impermanence of everything you thought you needed to hold onto. Now the forest awaits, the vast, spacious, unadorned wisdom of simply seeing, seeing without grasping, seeing without naming, seeing without becoming. And what is seen passes, but what sees remains. That is what you are. You've walked through fire. You've stepped through silence. You've come home carrying a flame that doesn't go out. Now comes the next unfolding. Not another story, not another seeker, but the unraveling of the idea that there was ever a seeker at all. And when that unravels, what remains is what has always been. So as this journey closes and the next opens, know this: you do not need to prepare. You do not need to wait. You do not need to become anything more than what you are. You need only notice. You need only sit and see what has never left you. The self is not in the heavens. It is not in the texts. It is not in the stories of awakening. It is here, in the pause between thoughts, in the awareness behind every moment, in the stillness that does not move, but allows all movement. And if you are ready to meet that stillness, not as a concept but as yourself, then the next Upanishad is already unfolding within you. The forest is waiting, not as a place to enter, but as the silence beneath your breath. So return once more to your body, to this moment, to the presence that has carried you through every step of this journey, and listen. Not for the next teaching, but for what has always been listening, the one who remains.